Thank you, Dr. Bensali, for that wonderful, foray into digital health and tech at scale. I'm sure we all took away, a lot of excitement from that. So we're going to dive now into our next session, which is more looking at, artificial intelligence and its, opportunities in clinical research. So my name is Meenal Katarpalma, dermatologist at Duke University, and I'm actually here with a couple of my colleagues that help me with my clinical research endeavors every single day. So I'm really excited to hear from them. So first we'll have Dr. Jaleel, who's a dermatologist and a clinical as well as translational researcher who earned her BS in biophysics from UAB in 2007, followed by her MD in dermatology residency over there as well. And after she joined Duke University in 2016, she completed a master's in health sciences through Duke Clinical Research Training Program. And so she is a diehard researcher, and her clinical and translational research, focuses on sex hormones in the skin and inflammation, particularly like hidradenitis suppurativa. And she's, has gotten some amazing funding from Dermatology Foundation, Skin of Color Society, and NIH. She is an investigator in several clinical trials, as well as translational studies. And I look forward to hearing what her thoughts are on AI in clinical trials.
Thank you for having me. Sorry. Thank you for having me here today. And today I'm going to talk about the topic of how we can really potentially accelerate clinical trials using AI and revolutionize the process of drug development. Because at the end of the day, all the research I do and everyone does is really to get drugs to our patients. And if we can do that sooner at low cost, that's really a great success. And these are my disclosures right here. I'm a clinical trials investigator for UCB, AbbVie, Sonoma, Eli Lilly. I have a fellow support from Pfizer in the past and UCB now, and I also work as a consultant for Eli Lilly and Novartis. So clinical trials, as at present, really face a high cost, and I know this because I negotiate a lot of budgets. And really long timelines from the time we're contacted, as well as a lot of inefficiencies in the process of recruitment that come up. And really, I think AI has a huge potential really to streamline this process by analyzing large amount of data sets. Machine learning, natural language processing. I know, at least at our university, we're trying to stay ahead of the game and doing some of that already with our EHR. And really, we're hoping eventually doing that will transform our science and how trials are executed. So really, what I want to focus here on is what can it do? I think, as someone who does basic science research as well as clinical trials, I'm kind of starting on both ends. I think one of the interesting features that I see the AI has is identifying a compound based on a target. So this is really preclinical. You're searching a database to kind of see what compound will target what molecule that may be important or relevant. So it kind of can do all of that automatically. And then you have machine learning algorithms that can then predict toxicity, like severity. You also have efficacy where you're looking at participants and with the compound and perhaps even predict who's going to have better survival and maybe tweak your studies in process to minimize harm to people who are not responding, especially in those oncology trials. And then there's also operational efficiencies where, you can look at the compound, you can look at the protocol, and perhaps look at likelihood of approval, likelihood of succeeding in a certain phase of the study. And again, just to summarize that busy slide, it's really enhanced patient stratification, predictive modeling for treatment efficacy, adverse event prediction, and again, looking at unstructured data that we all know exists in our health systems, really to refine your cohort. These are some case studies, just highlighting what has already been underway. One of them is in silico medicine, and on the right-hand side, you'll see kind of a fun graphic, and it's really starting with looking at a pan-fibrotic target with no real direct association with fibrosis, and then looking at a molecule that would perhaps target that, and then synthetically doing it in the lab and doing some cell-based assays and doing it all kind of in a shorter time span than you would otherwise. Hopefully, accelerating this research. So I know I had a friend who actually died from complications of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and she had double lung transplant, and it's a lot to go through as a young person who's typically targeted with this. And having a drug that's now accelerated and developed and is hitting clinical trials is incredible in a span of 6 months to a year. So I think there's a lot of potential for those rare diseases, especially with no great treatment options, where we can do a lot more with already existing data sets. Because I know I look at gene expression profiles and all these data, and I sometimes wish I had an AI right now, right next to me doing that analysis instead of doing it manually. Sometimes I wish I was part of these companies to analyze those because I'll have access to those softwares. So I do know there's a lot of benefit that could be harnessed from this. The other thing is, patient screening. I know even when I started at Duke like some years ago, I remember one of my first trials, we had like 1 week window to recruit because we got activated and we had to close our trial in a week. It was just one of those delayed activations. And I remember just sitting there one afternoon going through all my clinics physically, being like, okay, I'm going to call some of these patients that I think could be good for the trial. But now, literally last month, we sent a blast to 4,000 plus patients who we used filters to see if they qualified. And then we got 300 responses back. And that happened in 1 week. Yes, it's a lot of work to go through those, but my point is now you have patients who are interested who meet some of the criteria. You still have to pre-screen them. You still have to do pre-screening questionnaire. However, now with even the ability to send these pre-screening questionnaires out, you can actually filter based on those responses. So what I could do, what I could do before was so much slower compared to what I can do now. And then another thing what I want to emphasize is our clinical trial outcomes. So a lot of studies struggle with not having great outcome measures to evaluate progression. And one of the interesting initiatives, again, not maybe as relevant to dermatology, is the Pfizer Blue Sky initiative. It was Pfizer, working with IBM to understand progression of Parkinson's disease, where you're having progressive symptoms, but clinical trials don't have outcome measures to really assess for that progression. So they developed a house that was hooked with all the bells and whistles to capture things real time, capture progression in a much more real-time fashion that allowed for potential acceleration of drug development. So looking at predictive and analytics, reducing costs, so you're able to do more with a fewer set of patients because you're able to monitor so many more variables much more closely. So again, in silico trials actually are interesting. They use causal AI to simulate efficacy arms. But it really depends on what data you already have. So this is one of the reasons I caution people, because if your previous trials didn't have a lot of diversity in who you're recruited, you're probably in silico trials are going to use the previous data sets that don't have as much diversity and simulate it. So it's basically simulating your placebo arms, simulating efficacy arms, and predicting trial failure rates so that you can really model treatment effect on your virtual patients. And it really has this benefit because it limits your reliance on human cohorts. It could potentially limit your placebo time or your placebo arm where patients are not getting any treatment, which sometimes in some trials, I think there's some ethical issues with that. And it also can lower cost for a lot of reasons, hopefully lowering cost of drugs. So you have a robust prediction of response to immune checkpoint blockade therapy that has been done with metastatic melanoma. So you can kind of figure out your arms. So it's mostly predictive analytics. And then other applications, we talked about patient recruitment. You really can analyze several EHRs at once and automate some of those recruitment workflows. You can retain your participants, you can engage them, you can do outreach, and also you can real-time monitor your participant diversity and really intervene early to make sure you have adequate representation of severe disease, mild disease, different factors. And also it allows for decentralized trials where you are able to do more virtually with wearable devices, perhaps remote monitoring, telemedicine. So more diverse cohorts of patients are able to participate, like young moms who can't take off work and other things where, you're not able to include those patients. So I really think you do have a lot of potential here to kind of maximize with AI. And again, these are my big take-home points. Wearable devices can enable remote monitoring. We've kind of seen that with Pfizer Blue Sky Initiative, and maybe in dermatology, it could be remote or wearable devices that image, I don't know. So real time, maybe looking at a plaque. Use predictive analytics to identify risks so that, if you do see that there's a cohort that's suffering adverse effects, you're able to real time understand why those patients are having those adverse events, and not, you prevent more patients from suffering. And then adaptive trial designs where you're modifying protocols with interim results, are able to conduct more subgroup analyses that then specify who this drug is going to work with and kind of in what conditions. And so really my key takeaways are we're trying to cut trial durations because honestly, it takes too long for a drug to come to market. And I have to say, having started a trial in 2020 and finally we have the approved medication for HS, and this year, I would say, it takes a long time, 5 years, it's a long time. And maybe even 10 years in terms of the preclinical part or longer. We're hoping precision medicine really does become future. And we really do think we can do better with personalized care with this AI technology that we may have in the future. And then trial diversity is important because again, we do need trial diversity to be able to harness those data sets in existing trials, but also maybe with AI, we can actually improve trial diversity with safer and more effective treatments for our diverse populations. And we're hoping decentralized trials allows more of that participation to happen. Thank you.